there's such a balance in this because we see it on either side. It's an imbalance and it's wrong, but it all comes down to motivation, because when we are in a place where we see, I want to glorify God, I want to love him, know him first. When we find our identity in Christ, that's the starting point for the why behind we're doing what we're doing. And so if we say no, it would be for the glory of God, because we need to protect that time, or we need family time. And so I think that we see it show up in so many areas, and we can sometimes peg people, oh, that's a people pleaser over there, you know? But then in ourselves, it's often hard to see because we can justify it as something good.
So are you a people pleaser? And have you realized how that's affected things in your life? Your relationships, your job, your relationships at your job, your habits, your identity. Well, our guest today is Jinger Duggar Vuolo, and she's here to share how to break free from people pleasing. And just that name makes you probably gonna go, whoop, wait a second, Duggar. She grew up on television and the TLC reality TV show 19 Kids and Counting On. And I don't know how many times did they change the name of the show?
A lot.
Because they kept having more kids. Right, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It was a constant evolving show title.
That makes sense. Now you live in L.A. with your husband, Jeremy. You've got 2 daughters. And tell us you're going to have a baby soon, right?
Yes, so we have 2 girls. Felicity is 6, Evangeline is 4, and then we have a little boy on the way, due any day.
Okay. Yeah. In fact, we heard you may have it during this interview. So
You know, if anything gets cut off, you know I'm headed to the hospital.
So here we go. The new book, it's People Pleaser, Breaking Free from the Burden of Imaginary Expectation. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
It's great to be here.
So let's talk about the book. And when did you discover you were a people pleaser, and what happened? What went down that made this kick in for you?
You know, it was interesting. I had looked at my life, kind of zooming out a little bit, and the moment that I think I discovered I was truly a people pleaser was when I wrote my last book, Becoming Free Indeed. That book basically broke down the teachings that I was raised under. Those teachings were based in a lot of fear, superstition, manipulation, and control. There was a teacher we followed, Bill Gothard, who claimed to speak for God, but he didn't. It was a cult-like setting. And so when I finally thought about, like, okay, what should I say? Should I write a book talking about these teachings? Not, leaving out family stuff, just talking specifically about how these teachings were harmful, how they affected my life. That was something that I had prayed about for a long time, but ultimately, as a people pleaser, I was afraid to speak up. I thought somebody else should do this. I'm the last person in the world who wants to ruffle anyone's feathers. I'm on everyone's good side right now. I could lose my community, friends, loved ones that I grew up with, because if I speak up, this is going to be an issue. And so I prayed about it for a long time, and with a lot of awesome support, people around me, I wrote that theological memoir, speaking about those teachings very publicly. But looking back over my life, I saw people-pleasing show up in so many areas. From the age of 5, I remember how I was constantly wanting to please my parents, and I was just more that temperament. But then fast forward into my teen years, I struggled with eating disorder for a short bit, a mild eating disorder, but it was still a struggle for me. And looking at my friends and saying, okay, how are they going to accept me? What can I do to get everyone pleased with me? And then fast forwarding into marriage, where with my husband, I was afraid to speak up and share even my differences with him. If there was something that came up, I would be like, oh, whatever you want is fine. And he said, I just don't want you to be a clone of me. Like, just go ahead and tell me what you think. But I was so afraid to speak up. And then in parenting, I saw it again. And it's like, it kept unfolding, because my friends, maybe they ate only organic food. And when they'd come over to the house, I'd be like, oh my goodness, I have to have organic snacks for my kids. And even though we're healthy eaters, it was like a next level fear of their rejection and feeling like I had to keep everyone, I had to be constantly agreeable to keep everyone on my good side. And so with all of that, there was this realization that people pleasing was showing up in so many areas of my life. And at the same time, I started to work through it and find freedom. And so that's why I chose to write this book.
So help define that people pleasing on its own, what that is, so that people can go, oh, yep, that's me.
Yes. So people pleasing, I think that when I look at it, it's when we put everyone else's opinions and preferences above our own or above what we know to be right or true. And so that can show up in so many ways because whenever there's someone who is in trouble or there's a bully who is acting out, then often we will feel like as a people pleaser, okay, I don't want to fear their wrath and I'm afraid to speak up. And I remember a couple scenarios where there was one instance where I was at a park with my kids and I felt very uncomfortable. Somebody was getting too close to my kids. They were being too friendly. And I had one on the swing and another one was on the slide. And I was like, oh no, I need to like leave the situation because this person's making me very uncomfortable. And so I approached him and I was kind of like, okay, we're not going to play this game because he was trying to play a game with one of my kids. And I was like, no, we're not going to play this game. And so I had to pull my kids away and leave the park. And as a people pleaser, that feels so uncomfortable. It doesn't matter who it is, if it's a friend, if it's a stranger. And at the same time, you realize, okay, I need to be able to speak up for those who can't. And I think that often as a people pleaser, we know what's right. We know what we want to say. And there's a time to speak up. There's a time to remain silent. But at the same time, it's a challenge to like navigate those waters. And so when I saw in my life, people pleasing showed up in a lot of different ways. It wasn't what you think. For me, it turned into isolation. So I wanted to isolate myself from others, thinking if I do that, then no one in my close circle, maybe they won't see my flaws and they won't see how, not every day I'm the best parent in the world and I don't have the cleanest house. I have Cheerios on my floor and it's hard to keep up with everything. And so with that, I wanted to isolate myself thinking that that was the safest option. And then we have others who go to the other extreme of being a serial server, as I call them, because they do everything in church and they're constantly serving. They're bringing the potluck meal. They're playing the piano. They're serving in nursery. They're cleaning up afterwards. They're leading a Bible study, a prayer meeting, and their entire life is consumed with serving. And at the same time, you can often look at the family and the family's falling apart. And it's like, okay, you have your priorities out of order. You need to learn to say no. And there's such a balance in this because we see it on either side. It's an imbalance and it's wrong. But it all comes down to motivation because when we are in a place where we see, I want to glorify God, I want to love him, know him first, when we find our identity in Christ, that's the starting point for the why behind we're doing what we're doing. And so if we say no, it would be for the glory of God because we need to protect that time or we need family time. And so I think that we see it show up in so many areas and we can sometimes peg people, oh, that's a people pleaser over there, But then in ourselves, it's often hard to see because we can justify it as something good.
That's good. People pleasing, man, that is something that I struggle with. I remember actually when I realized how bad it was just a few years ago and somebody said something pretty awful to me. And I realized months down the line that I was still trying to gain this person's approval. I was like, now I think I've swung too far the other way. So I need to find a happy medium like you were talking
about anything.
Right, exactly. Just, yeah, everybody's on my list. You were talking about, your that rigid religious upbringing. Do you think that plays a part in the need to people please? Because, you were talking about how you see yourself and kind of judge yourself according to that.
Yes, for sure. I definitely saw that as being a huge element in my people pleasing. That's kind of what started it and maybe propelled it to the next level. And at the same time, I see how even being outside of that system for 8 years, it has been something that has continued to show up in my life. And there have been elements that have started there, but that's not the end all. And so, yes, within that system, there was a lot of focus on the outward. And so on your performance, on what you're doing for God and for others around you. And you can place that in your mind as something to live up to keep this standard up. Because if you don't, then you're letting God down. You're not going to be an example to the world. And that was something that was definitely drilled into us in the system. And so this performance-based mindset shows up. Like I said, in the church, we see it in the workplace, anywhere basically where you're rubbing shoulders with people, which is every day for most of us, in your family situation. It is something that is so common. And I think that when I was in that system, I had a lot of fear surrounding the why behind what I was doing. So if I was people pleasing, it was, I wanted to please the Lord, but then at the same time, I had this conflict of like, okay, well, if I don't, then I'm going to be in big trouble. Like God's going to be out to get me, and I cannot do anything wrong, because if I mess up, that basically could define the rest of my life. And it could be something so simple, so small as listening to drums, music with drums. And that was, the legalistic rules definitely played a major part in my people pleasing, because it's easy to follow a set of standards and rules. You can follow those things thinking that they're the gospel. You can follow those things thinking they're going to gain you favor with God. And at the end of the day, you have to realize, okay, this is not gospel and Christianity. What I was following was not. It was a man-made list of rules. And I kept leaning on that, even in my people pleasing. Once I realized, okay, once I was a believer and I switched into this mindset of like, I want to please the Lord, there was this conflict in my heart, because at the same time, I was like, well, what does it mean to please the Lord? Because this teacher's telling me he has the list for me, but it wasn't actually in scripture. And so that's where the danger kicked in. And a lot of that fear-based religion really had a grip on my heart.
You said something that struck a chord with me, because I deal with this all the time, where you were afraid that you were going to disappoint God if you disappoint people. We take those things that we believe about people and we transfer them onto God. I am the worst offender of that. And it's interesting that it would affect us that way, because I think, in our core, we understand God is not a person, but there's that temptation. Well, if I'm letting this person down, I'm letting God down.
Yeah, I think that that's a struggle, because we realize there are so many truths in scripture. So community is a good thing. We realize that, because we were designed for community. So it's not something that is inherently bad to want to be approved by others and to want to be in community and friendship, because from the beginning, we were designed to be in that community. And with Adam and Eve, God created Eve for Adam because there was community. And in the Trinity, there was community there. And so we see it throughout the design from the very beginning, right? All the way throughout. And that's something that I think has been something I've had to realize too, because there's a brokenness in realizing that after the fall, that sin entered the world, and those relationships are not going to be perfect. They are not going to fully fulfill us, and they're not meant to. God is the only one who can, and he's the only one who will totally give us that fulfillment, and even the acceptance and the love that we're looking for. So we can look all around us and think that, okay, by keeping everyone happy with me, by being this awesome Christian person, I'm going to gain the community I've always desired, and that's going to be my fulfillment. And we know that's not true. We know that's not how life works. And so realizing that, I think from the get-go is important, because we can go into relationships then saying, not like, what can I get from this relationship? What can I suck, dry of? Because oftentimes that's what happens. We just end up going into them with a selfish motive, and we can say, okay, what can this person give to me? Oh, are they like super famous? Are they popular? Maybe they have something that I don't have that I really am craving. And so when we enter relationships from a place where we realize we are wanting to love this person from a place where we are completely satisfied knowing who we are in Christ, and we have that relationship first, then it's an overflow. It's not going to drain us. It's going to only be what God has designed it to be.
Yeah.
That's good.
Wow. It's amazing because really what I pick up so much in your writings is you ask that question, what's your motive? And that just sort of was a huge reset for me. I was just like, oh, what am I trying to gain by, first we have to recognize the people pleasing, I'm guessing, but then what's my motive? Talk to me a little bit about that, because that was the real eye opener for me.
Yeah, I think our motivations, we can struggle with that because it's something that we can ultimately, we only God knows what our heart motive is, because I think that part of the human side of it is we are in routine. We go to work every day. We have our family around us. If it's our kids we're working with, it's like there is a certain routine and regimen that we get in, and we can often just be doing the next thing. And there's a certain beauty in that too, that we realize we don't want to overthink some of it, because if we do, then we'll start to feel bad, because then you can overthink to the point where you're like, okay, wait, what's my motive? What's my motive? And that can also be unhealthy when we go to that extreme of constantly being introspective. There's a certain reality of, okay, I want to examine my relationship with God and see, Lord, am I pleasing you? Am I doing this out of pride? Am I doing this to gain the approval of others? Please show me if I am. And I think when we're in that communion and fellowship with the Lord, when we're walking with him daily, it doesn't have to look crazy. It doesn't have to be an hour-long, devotion every morning at 5 a.m. It can look like the daily dependence on the Lord in that moment. Okay, Lord, I feel like this is a struggle. And I think that that's something that God will show us. And you can't say, okay, well, one day it's going to be the certain prescription, because I think that's what we look for is, okay, well, as a people pleaser, what do I say yes to? What do I say no to? Because I don't want to do this out of a wrong motivation. So out of fear of not doing it out of a wrong motivation, you do nothing.
I love what you just said about throwing it back to the Lord. And a lot of times I find myself going, Lord, you see the situation, what would you have me do? And that helps me start to delineate, what is my motive? And so that's basically what you were saying, and I really appreciate that. Something I especially relate to strongly is your quote. It goes something like this: confession, I didn't know why managing my emotions, my stress, my jitters felt so hard. Amen. Boy, have I been there. Why is this so hard for me? I'm trying to do everything I can. I knew in order to avoid any kind of confrontation. Oh, yeah. I don't we all hate confrontation or failure in order to be the most perfect person I could be? You go on to say, I knew that I was miserable. What I didn't know was why. That is powerful. Talk to me about that.
It was, I think those words, they still hit me, because you realize that is the feeling of a people pleaser. That's what you walk through, this anguish, turmoil. You're like, oh, no one else gets it, because why is it so hard to process everything that's happening around me, and just to feel it in your core, and you're like, oh my goodness, why is there another situation? Why do I have to face this person? Why do I have to have a difficult conversation? And at the end of the day, I think that when our reputation is at stake, when we feel like this person is going to hate me forever if I say the wrong word, or my friend, if I don't have it all together, she's going to look down on me. Those things are real. And I think that they often are one of the hardest things to deal with. And so whether that's, a spouse, where with my husband, Jeremy, this was something that I want to go back to, because in that setting with Bill Gothard's teaching, there was so much that was taught about even how women were to operate. You're supposed to keep your husband happy with you all the time by being completely agreeable, by having the house clean, by having a good, like having your hair not frizzy, like mine is a little frizzy today, right? Having, your makeup on, having everything together. When he comes home and he asks you how your day was, it was amazing, regardless of what happened. You could have
Sorry, I can't help but laugh.
throw up, and it's like, it was the best day ever, because you just constantly want to keep him happy. Well, that's not reality. And I think that he was so loving and patient and kind with me, like in the way that he handled all of how I was responding to him. I was trying to be completely agreeable because that's what I was taught. That's how I'm going to keep him happy, and that's how we're going to have this perfect marriage and perfect kids, and everything's going to be great. But he was like, no, who is Ginger? Tell me if you had a hard day. Tell me if you disagree. Tell me where you went to go to dinner. I don't want to have to decide all the time. I don't want you to be a clone of me, like I said earlier. And so there's this certain sense of like, okay, well, disagreement never feels good. But at the same time, arguments don't equal rejection. And that's something I always believed was true. I thought that if I had a disagreement, or maybe my friend saw something different than I did, then that was rejection. And that's something that so many of us feel. There's that emotion, and you can feel our emotions go up and down, and we have to realize, well, what is true? And thinking on truth has been so helpful for me, because the second I let my emotions run rampant, then I'm in a place where I'm just totally spiraling. I feel like everything's going to fall apart. Every friend's going to leave me. And I'm not going to have anybody who's going to care about me if I ever share anything different than what they are saying. And so we have to think on truth. Well, what is true? If I actually speak up in this moment, that's going to be most loving, because then they can see who I actually am, and I can hear their opinion, even if it's a differing one. And we can agree to disagree. We can come together. And that's something that's been beautiful to watch. As a people pleaser, I can have that fear, but then is it a reality? Sometimes it is, but at the same time, you're only going to be in true community and relationship when you're willing to speak about the hard things, when you're willing to speak up about your differences.
That's good.
That's exactly right. I'm so glad we brought that out, because I think that I call it the Chicken Little syndrome of laying awake at night and like everything's horrible and I made a mistake here and there. And what I realized is I really have not gone into whatever relationship thinking about them. I've gone into this whole thing thinking about me. And I've just been under a real conviction, especially this last year, about how I'm entering relationships and what is my motive. So thank you for that. I think you have just given us a blueprint for successful relationships.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, we're talking with Jinger Duggar Vuolo, and this is the book, and it's People Pleaser, Breaking Free from the Burden of Imaginary Expectations. And you have a little, there's a People Pleaser assessment test that you have on page 22, and you're saying, hey, just a heads up, if you describe yourself with one of these words, you might be a people pleaser. Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah, I really wanted to have a helpful tool for those who maybe they don't see themselves as a people pleaser. We can often peg other people around us just based on what we see on the outside. Oh, you're such a people pleaser, But then when it comes to us, it is harder to actually identify what those areas are that could lead to people pleasing in our life, even if it's not what we're defined by. And so I wanted to give a little assessment so people can take a pause early on in the book to see, okay, how are these things being manifested in my life? And am I a people pleaser? Mm-hmm. And then at the end of each chapter, I also wanted to add some thought-provoking questions, especially as a busy mom. I'm in a season where it is very hard to stop and to actually be able to take in a lot of information at this season. And so I thought if I have a couple questions at the end of each chapter, where the reader can take a moment to self-reflect, then you can take those questions throughout the day and just think about it and say, okay, how did I react when the situation came up? And just ask yourself some of the harder questions, and realizing that you're a people pleaser is hard, but then also it's helpful because you can see that there are steps forward. There's a path when we are looking beyond ourselves, like you said, even Sally, there was that moment where you're like, okay, well, I realized I was doing this out of trying to gain other people's approval. And I'm walking into relationships like that. That's not going to end well, because we are going to just try to suck everyone dry of what we want. And so I wanted to put that in there, and hopefully it's helpful, just to give people some tools to see if they are a people pleaser, and then to move from there and find freedom.
Now, you say that there are people-pleasing styles. Which is kind of funny to say.
A lot.
What's your people-pleasing
I know.
style? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There are. And that's the thing. Like I said, the isolation. You have to see, like, am I one of those? Going to protect myself?
Right.
Am I one who's going to be that serial server? Because we don't want to acknowledge it half the time. But when we can see it laid out, then we can put ourselves in one of those, categories, I guess you would say, or those styles.
Sure.
And see, where am I?
Yeah. What is your style?
Oh my goodness. All of them.
Must be so stylish.
Yeah. What's coming down the runway today? Yeah. Well, I think about, just the energy that I have wasted throughout my life, people pleasing. And I go back to, high school comes to mind. I wanted so badly to be in the in crowd. And I spent all this time just trying to make those people happy and please them. And there were some friendships. Now, thankfully, they made it and they're still intact. But man, I think about the investment I could have made into those people who loved me for who I was then, instead of trying to please people who were never going to let me in their little circle. So, obviously, like it drains us of our energy. And then you can get so caught up in that just the dreams that you have, the aspirations, just out the window, because you kind of can't do both at once. Do you find that in your own life?
Oh, for sure. Yes. Especially, even being in a large family, you can see how it was so much fun. We had a blast, but there's this reality of like identity crisis that you can have at times, where you're looking at everyone around you and even your siblings, and you're like, okay, well, what are they into? What should I be doing? Or in your friend circles, like you said, in high school, it's like, oh, this person's super interested in art, or maybe they're a musician. Oh, I wish I was a musician. I wish I had that skill. Then people would like me. And we can start to head down a path of not even realizing who we are, because we've become such a clone of everyone around us. And our friend group defines who we are. And some of that is natural. Some of that we see as a pattern in human history. You can be inspired by someone and then go on to do great things in that field. But let's just say I'm not going to be a math teacher ever. That's never going to happen. But I would always look at these kids who had these big books, and they were like math, they were really smart with all that stuff. They could just break down anything. I'm horrible at math. So even with my 6-year-old's little homework page, I'm like, oh my word, I don't know what I'm doing. No, maybe not that bad. But there are times where you feel like that, right? But when we start to look at everyone around us, compare our lives, compare what they look like, what they're doing, their income, all of these things, that comparison can quickly be such a trap, and it can cause us to become so ungrateful and to look at oh man, I'm not going to be able to please this person because I don't have the money they have. And we can just become so introspective, so depressed over it. And ultimately, it just goes back down to that core reality. Okay, who am I, and what am I trying to get? And am I really content with where God has me? Am I being grateful? Am I having a heart of gratefulness to God for what He's given me, the season of life I'm in, even if it's difficult? Maybe I have a loved one who has a health issue, and I'm walking through that, and the person next to me doesn't. Well, I think that's what we see as coming to the place where we have to thank God for how He made us, who He created us to be, the time in history He put us in, the family He's given us, the community He's given us, and all of those things we can quickly become so ungrateful when we start to look at everyone else and think, if only I could perform like them, if only I could be like them, then I would be happy. And so I think that's a struggle for all of us, and it just is a daily battle.
I feel like also, and maybe you found this to be true, you can kind of correct those people-pleasing patterns and then relapse when there's a change or something. That may be the wrong word to use, but you start going back to those behaviors and that people-pleasing. Like maybe when you moved to your new home in California, did you find that was true with you?
Oh, 100%. I think that being in a place where you start to become so comfortable, I lived in Texas for 2.5 years, and I was just starting to
I'm a
get
Texan.
that
Sorry, I
Texas
got
look.
excited.
I love that. Coming to that place though where you realize, okay, I feel so settled in where I am, and then you make a big move and you have to find an entire new friend group. You're moving to a new church, a new state. It's hard. I think that reality of having to work through all those things all over again, starting from scratch, is really hard. And that was something that I definitely faced. I struggled when we first got to Los Angeles with the reality of having to let people into my life. And part of that is I was more guarded because being in the public eye, there would be people who would share something and then it might be on a tabloid the next week. And then you would have situations that would come up that were difficult, painful, hard, and you didn't really you didn't know who you could trust. Why are you wanting to be my friend? Is it because I was on TV or because you're trying to gain something from me? So I was more guarded in that. And that could have just been more of a struggle that the Lord had for me to walk through. But once I was realizing, okay, I got to a point where after having our daughter, I started to struggle with some postpartum depression, and I was just like in a fog, and I didn't know what to do. And Jeremy was like, "You need to get help." And even just talking to a friend was like embarrassing about, that. I didn't know. And there were new friends. And then I walked through miscarriage, and I remember not being sure, how do I talk about this? Because I don't really, I was new to the community. I didn't really have a ton of close friends yet. But through that, when I was willing to open up and talk, those friends, I remember one in particular came and sat with me days after I'd had this miscarriage. And she just came and sat on the couch with me for a couple hours while Jared was at work. And she brought me a little basket and just was kind of quiet and was just there. And that meant the world to me. And to this day, they are now, it's so sweet. The Lord brought them into our Bible study. They're serving alongside us in even the college ministry. And it's been really sweet to see how that friendship was developed. But it was developed out of me not pushing her out. Because even in that moment, I didn't know. I was like, she had asked, can I come over? And I was like, I was just thinking, in some sense, I almost want to isolate myself so she doesn't have to see me like this, because I was a mess. My house was a wreck, and I had a little one running around who was probably very loud, and I just didn't know what to do. And when I let her in, it actually blessed her, and that was something that I think, looking back, I wouldn't trade that for the world. The Lord allows those difficulties to happen, but when we let community also happen, it blesses that other person. And that's something that I didn't realize. If I would have said no, I'm also robbing her of the joy of serving. And as a people pleaser, it's easy to just want to have it all together. Just say, I've got this. I don't need anyone. Yeah. But at the same time, I saw that was just not, I wasn't going to make it any better by pushing her out. And even when the other friend wanted to come over and help me out when I was in the postpartum depression, she came and cleaned my house, brought me dinner. And I was like, wow, that was such a blessing. But it also deepened our friendship from that level on.
I find that, well, let me just start over again. Your chapter, you alluded to the critics. I was like, oh gosh, I've got to devour this, because honestly, I am my worst. I pour my heart into everything, as we do, and then go back and just give myself the hardest time. And so I love that you included this chapter, the critics, because I'm the biggest one. And so, yeah, you talk about being on a platform much larger than any of us could really experience. And yet you found your way to deal with that? Talk to us about that. Chapter 6, the critics.
Oof.
Oh,
Okay, so I'm telling you,
oh.
this one's a tough one at times. There are times where you just want to fade into the background and not have anyone know who you are.
Yep.
So that way there's not another tabloid article that pops up. And especially when it comes to those that you love and care about and your kids, things like that that pop up in the media, it's so hard to let those things go. And at the same time, I think early on, when Jeremy had just entered this world of reality TV, of the opinions, of the articles, all of that, it was really tough. And we had this conversation about wanting to try to stay off of really the internet and looking at too many comments and not letting it affect us, because Jeremy had such a helpful perspective on it. He said, like, if you allow those critics to give you any sort of validation and you take it to your core, it's like, wow, they're praising me today, there's a great article. Well, that the next day there's going to be a nasty article that's going to cut you down, and that will, if you're looking for your identity in that, that's going to really mess you up, because you cannot live for the praise and approval of those tabloids, of those articles, of people that you've never met, that don't genuinely know you. Even some well-meaning people will write things that are not so loving, and maybe it's from their perspective of what they think is happening in your life. And you have to be okay with not saying anything, not responding, and not reading it. And so I think that was something early on. But the critics, so we had all of that, the public side of critics, and everyone will have their own version of that. So whether it's on your social media, it's not just reality TV, because now everyone, like, you have so many people with Instagram, back in the day, Facebook, all these things that you can live for a like or a comment. And put your identity and put your self-worth in it. Oh no, so-and-so didn't like my post, or maybe they said something that was not kind, so now I'm just going to have the worst day ever because of that comment. Well, you were living for that. You were living for their approval in such a way that it affected your life. And so, but then fast forward, going to the other side of it, where we are our worst critic as a people pleaser. You can see there's a comment, okay, well, maybe that person doesn't know me. But when you feel like you know yourself so well, you'll criticize yourself even harder. And that, for us as people pleasers, like you said, it's hard. We want to do that because we will go leave a conversation, leave a room, and for an hour or for in the middle of the night, like you said, you get up and you're like, oh, what did I say? That was so stupid. You're such an idiot. Why did you say that? Now this person's not going to like you, because we can just go play through this whole script of what we said, what we should have said, how we could have impressed people better, how we could have worn a more expensive outfit. And all of these things can quickly become a false identity, and we can put our assurance in that, like, oh man, well, I had a good conversation today. That can also happen, where we play it over in our mind of like, wow, I must have really impressed them. And and then no one's thinking about you. Like, you're the one who's thinking about it. Like, everyone else could just be like going about their day. They're not going to think twice. But here we are in pride, rolling through the script of how well we did. And so people pleasing it's part of that. Like, we see all of these elements, right? It's the inward critic, the outward critics. All of these things will affect our life on a daily basis if we don't have our focus ultimately starting in the right place with that relationship with the Lord, like I said, getting
Serving him, reflecting him to the people in our lives. Yep. I don't wake up in the middle of the night worried about that. When I've done that, when I've walked into a room and thought, there you are, I find that I sleep peacefully that night because I didn't make it all about myself. So I think that's just where I have found so much freedom in reading your book and just devouring it, really, and just saying thank you for writing it. It's a message for all of us.
Oh, well, thank you so much for that encouragement.
You almost quoted yourself. There was something that you said I thought was adorable. You said that you probably wouldn't worry about what people think of you if you could know how seldom they actually do.
Yeah,
Whoops.
That's a very
it's
good
so
point.
true. Well, I mean, that's just the reality of it because half the time, you want to think that people are always thinking about you, but it's just not really true.
No. Yeah. Talk about some of the freedom that you have found in overcoming people pleasing, and how has that affected your relationships? How's it affected your life?
Oh, it has been huge. I think being able to speak up when I need to has been something that is it's challenging. There are days where I don't want to. There are days where I might not choose that path, but ultimately whenever we are willing to say, okay, I see that someone's being harmed by something. I want to speak up against this bully. I want to speak up against this false teacher. I want to share truth and in a loving, respectful, kind way. That for me has been the biggest thing that I've noticed is just me being able to find my voice to speak up, to share truth when it needs to be shared. And that I think for a lot of people pleasers is going to be so difficult. And finding freedom has looked like just the little baby steps of my thought process, not letting my thoughts run wild, not letting that trail of like, just, oh my goodness, this person thinks this of me. Oh, now I'm just going to think about that for 5 days straight until I see them. And then I'm going to think about it for the next week after I see them again because, oh, I'm so consumed by what they think of me. There's been a certain level of freedom found there where I didn't think it was going to be possible. But when I'm able to train my thoughts to think, okay, no, I don't want to walk into a room saying, what can I get from these people? How are they going to approve of me? Do I have an expensive pair of shoes on? Do I have what they're looking for? But look, walking into that room and saying, no, like, okay, this is, look, it's a room full of college students. Okay, how can I pour into them? Which one can I talk to? Can I pull one aside, like, and have this conversation and just see how they're doing? How can I pray for you? And not seeking to get anything from that person, it changes everything and it gives you joy because you're not consumed with this fear, like this dread of like entering a room of new people. And also realizing, okay, these are people who are made in the image of God. God designed them this way. So if they're smarter than me, they have more money, if they're in a, better place, I feel like when I open my mouth, I'm going to say something stupid. Well, okay, God has he's given me certain gifts to share. He's given them gifts to share, and that I need to be okay with that. I don't need to try to be a clone of them. I want to love and serve them as Christ has loved and served me, laying down his life. He did not come to this earth to gain anything, but to lay down his life, to give his life so we could be saved. And that's the beauty of the gospel that we see. And I think when we enter relationships like that, it changes everything. And there can be freedom because we realize that we are no longer having to perform. We're not having to perform even for God. And as a people pleaser, that's something that can quickly happen. We can start to fall into that. Like, oh, I didn't get up at 5 a.m. Now I'm a terrible Christian. Now God's looking at me bad. And realizing, okay, that's not how he views me as his child. I don't want to try to be a people pleaser even in that realm. So getting that foundation and that thought process right is a daily battle. It's something that I think many of us will face until eternity when everything's made new. It's perfect. But until then, the struggle continues and we just have to remind ourselves of the truth of God's word.
I love this whole discussion, obviously, but it reminds me of what 2020 did to us. It helped us learn to live independently. And so now I'm in a new community and I know what I need to do. I need to find that new community church and get in there and start serving. Talk to us about the fact that you have just recently or not too long ago done that. I love your Cheerios story. You alluded to it earlier, but it was just such a great picture to what it means to the importance of building that community.
Yeah, I think that community is huge. It's something that when we're walking through the joys of life and the challenges of life, there will be times where we do want to just isolate ourselves, like I said, out of self-protection. But the community that God has gifted us with, in even, within the church, there is a deeper bond and love there can be hard because people do let us down. God is the only one who will never let us down, and we have to remember that. And there's a vulnerability that has to come and happen when we realize that these are flawed humans. We're not expecting these people to be perfect. Even our best friends will let us down. And that's a hard reality to face walking into any friendship. But once I came to LA, that was something that I really desired, was to have some deep community and some people I could talk to about just about anything. And the Lord provided that. He provided it through friendships with, there's a woman in our church who she has, already raised a child, and that one's married. And so then she's like a second mom to me here. And her husband is such good friends with my husband. We're friends all together, right? And it's really sweet. So they love on our kids. And then we have another group of moms that have been amazing. And one mom in particular is so sweet. So I shared the story because her kid came over to my house. She was a new friend of mine, and she was like, "Hey, can I stop by your house? I'm in the neighborhood. I just wanted to like swing by for a minute." And I was kind of like, "Oh, my house is a little bit messy." And I like a clean house. I mean, I can be cleaning, and no one comes over. And then the second it's messy, everyone wants to come over. So I was like,
Yep.
Of course.
this is how it works. So she texted me, and I was like, dang it, she's gonna think I'm a slob. But I ended up just saying, okay, sure, come on by. So she brings her little infant, her little kid who was crawling, just started crawling, and her little girl crawled under my table, immediately picked up old dried Cheerios, picking them off, and was putting them in her mouth. And I was like, oh my word, I'm so mortified. But in that moment, I just said, oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so sorry. I was like, I apologize. And so I went and got the broom, started sweeping it up, and she helped me clean it up. She's like, don't worry about it. This is how, my house looks half the time too. And she's like, it's okay. And I was like, I promise I clean my house. But it was really sweet because from that point on, there were things we were talking about, just organization and all. And she's like, hey, how about this? I can even come over some days and like, I'll help you tackle a project. You'll help me tackle an organization project, like that closet, the game closet that you open and all the pieces fall out.
I know it. I've got one.
Yeah. It's intense. So she was like, how about we just like switch off? Cause she's like, I don't have all the time to do it by myself, but when someone's there, I'll knock out that hour, get it done. So that type of friendship too, where it's not like, we're going to sit down and we're going to be friends. We're going to talk about this, but it's through the raw, the messy, and you're not putting on a front, because then you're just living life alongside each other. And that's a beautiful thing. And it's so sweet and refreshing to see. And so our friendship has been like that for years now. And it's actually like really sweet. She was just over here the other week helping me clean out my garage, which was horrible.
That's a friend.
No kidding.
It's
About to say, y'all can come over here now.
Exactly.
My garage needs cleaning.
Oh, man.
Let's
Wow.
be friends.
This has been so good. Jinger, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Really fascinating.